Hello and welcome to this presentation for Theme 1 of A-Level Business. This one is on 1.1.2 Market Research, and it will focus on primary and secondary research. What do you need to be able to do? Well, first you need to be able to differentiate between a product and a market-orientated approach to new product development. Second, you need to be able to analyse the relative benefits of primary versus secondary market research. So a product orientation. A product-orientated business is one which is inward-looking. It takes an inward-looking approach to new product development, where the key focus is on the product itself and how it can be made. Product development is heavily informed by scientific research and technical development by the research and development department of a business. The business will concentrate on producing high-quality products and then later look to create a market for them. This approach is most common with technologically advanced products where the consumer does not have the technological knowledge or the technical knowledge to realise that this product could exist or know that they might actually want to use it. Sony is a company that has been famous for its product-orientated approach, inventing the Sony Walkman that you can see on the screen, where there were no other small portable music devices in existence. So it's a very risky strategy because you don't have consumers' ideas to include in the product development process, but the potential rewards are huge if you're the first person to develop something like the Walkman that turns out to be a huge success. The opposite of a product-orientated approach is a market-orientated approach. Market orientation involves looking outwards when developing new products, where the needs of consumers are at the centre of decision making. Product development is heavily influenced by the findings of market research, and the business will try very hard to understand the needs of consumers and then adapt or create products that should meet those needs. And this approach hopefully should reduce the risk of new product development, but it's impossible to totally eliminate it. All new products have a very high risk of failure. Okay, so you need to be able to differentiate between a product and a market-orientated approach to new product development. Hopefully you can do that now. And now we're going to take a look at market research. So firms that take a market-orientated approach to new product development will invest very heavily in market research. This can be defined as the collection, presentation and analysis of information to inform a business about its market. It allows decisions to be made on a scientific basis rather than based on intuition. So make sure you get that definition down. So what kind of things do businesses want to research? What kind of information are they looking for? Well, businesses will want to collect information about a whole range of things, including the market. What's the size of the market? How big is the customer base? How is it growing? What trends can we recognise within the market? Might they extrapolate into the future? What are the needs, wants and expectations of consumers, and how might these be changing? Businesses should therefore be able to design products and promotional strategies, for instance, to effectively meet consumer requirements. They will want to collect information about market segments as well, both existing segments and also potential segments, to gain an insight into consumer behaviour and how this might vary between different consumer groups. Firms will also want to find out about competitor strategies. Where are they positioned within the market? What are competitors' unique selling points? How can we as a business differentiate ourselves from the competition that's out there? So those are the types of questions that market research will focus on. So what about different types of market research? Well, our focus today is on the difference between primary and secondary market research. Primary data is collected first-hand for a specific purpose. Secondary data, on the other hand, is data that you can use but that has already been created for a different purpose, but you might be able to adapt it and use it for what you're trying to find out. So let's take a look at these two in a little bit more detail. Let's focus in on primary research first. Let's go back here. Another example here is observation. Retailers often use observation to see how consumers behave in their stores, to help them to get some insight into consumer reactions to the store layout, to particular displays that they've set up, and that kind of thing. And our last example of primary market research is test marketing. So test marketing involves launching a new product in a narrow geographical area before a full launch. And this gives a business a chance to collect feedback and make changes to the product, and maybe changes to other things such as their promotional strategy or their pricing strategy before launching the product in its full geographical area. Okay, so that's primary market research, buying a market research report. And companies like Mintel, that you can see here on the right, their job is to carry out market research and produce reports that can be used by businesses in an industry that they have researched. The great thing about these is they're on a very wide scale and often very detailed, but the trouble is they can be very expensive to buy. So for small businesses, buying in these market research reports might just not be feasible. Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit about sampling now. Both primary and secondary research is likely to be viewed based on the views of a sample, because it is both expensive and often impractical to collect the views of the whole population. By population, I don't mean the whole of the UK or the whole of the country that we're talking about. By population, we're just talking about the target market. So if your target market is 7 to 9 year old girls, then all 7 to 9 year old girls in the country would be part of your population, your target market. But it's impractical and expensive to ask them all for their opinion. So what businesses will typically do is actually just ask a sample or a subset of the whole of the market that you're targeting. And of course, sampling creates a risk of collecting biased views. And the smaller the sample, the higher the risk of bias, and we would say that the results would be less valid. So firms have got to weigh up the cost savings that they get from sampling against the risk of bias and the potentially unreliable results that it might generate. So bear in mind, all market research is likely to be based on a sample, and you need to ask questions about how big was the sample, how reliable, to what extent did the participants in the sample accurately represent all of the target market that the business is actually trying to survey. Okay, so we also need to take a look at the pros and cons of different types of market research. So obviously sampling is a disadvantage of both primary and secondary research, but let's take a look at those two different types of research in a little bit more detail. Actually, make sure you get that down please first. So sampling makes market research cheaper and more feasible than surveying the whole population, but there is a risk of bias if the sample is unrepresentative of the population. That's a very important concept, so make sure you've got some good notes on that. Okay, let's move on and look at the pros and cons of primary market research. Well, one of the major benefits of primary market research is that it is actually directly focused on whatever your research objectives are. If you buy in secondary research, it may not be focused exactly on what you're trying to achieve. A second benefit is that it is kept private. It's not publicly available. If you use government reports or competitor materials, everybody can see those, and you will not get a source of competitive advantage from them. But if you carry out in-depth research yourself, you can use that, and it may be a source of competitive advantage. The other advantage of primary research is you can get more detailed insights sometimes than from using secondary sources, particularly if you carry out something like a focus group or consumer panels to get in-depth insight into customer views, and that can be very helpful in planning your marketing strategy. But of course, primary research has its drawbacks. First of all, it can be very time-consuming and costly to obtain. There is, of course, the risk of survey bias depending on the size of your sample and how well it's constructed. So bear in mind how reliable your market research is depends on how representative your sample is of the views of your whole target population. Okay, let's look at secondary market research, pros and cons. So often it's free and easy to obtain, and an advantage is also that it's quick to access and use. So you can get it straight away, you can get cracking on using it and making some changes to the marketing strategy that you're planning to use. And it can also be a good source of market insights. It tends to be quite wide-ranging, so it can be useful for identifying overall trends and the kind of big picture of what's going on in your market, particularly these reports from organisations such as Mintel. But it has its drawbacks. Remember, you need to check how recent it is, because it may have been produced a while ago, and in which case the findings might no longer be relevant for you. Bear in mind, you haven't created it for a specific need, so it's not tailored to what you're trying to find out, so the extent to which it can be useful may be limited. And also, as I mentioned earlier, some of these specialist reports from organisations like Mintel here are expensive, so it might be unaffordable for businesses depending on their circumstances. Alright, so what you needed to be able to do was differentiate between a product and market orientated approach to developing new products, and then you needed to be able to explain what primary and secondary market research are and what the pros and cons are of these two different types of market research. Hopefully you can do that now. Thank you very much for listening.